I am Laura Dixon, and you are listening to the Naturally Thin for Life podcast, episode number 137, Lingering. Welcome to the Naturally Thin for Life podcast. I'm going to teach you how to get out of your diet brain so that you too can be naturally thin for life. No counting, restricting, or obsessing. I am going to take the mystery out of it for you so that you can become naturally thin starting today. Are you ready? Let's do this. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're going to talk about lingering. When you're kind of just like lingering in the eating, maybe a little bit past the point that you want to be. I, funny enough, was thinking about this for myself lately because I just noticed there's like this little bit of lingering that sometimes I will feel drawn to do when I'm eating food. And then someone in the Naturally Thin for Life program had the same thing that she was going through. And so I had been thinking about this for myself and I coached her on the call. And so I wanted to share it with you here because I think it's sometimes very subtle and we don't always notice it, but there can be so much wisdom that we can learn from what I'm going to teach you in today's podcast and understanding about yourself that will make it a lot easier for you to be more present, to be more peaceful, to be more relaxed in your life when you understand what is behind the lingering. So before we get started, if you are enjoying the podcast, getting a lot out of it, please take a minute to write a review and leave a review. And I shared this with you last week, and I want to keep doing this. When you write a review, if you have a question or something you're just dying to know or understand or anything you want me to answer, nothing is off limits. Put it in the review that you write, and I go through those and I will answer any and all of your questions. Okay, so when we talk about lingering, what I mean by lingering is you're just kind of hanging out, eating just a couple more bites. You're going just a little bit past your optimal satisfaction level. And this is why it's really important to use the satisfaction language that I shared with you in a couple of podcasts earlier prior to this, because when you're so much clearer on how you want to feel when you're done eating, it's so much easier to be honest with yourself if you're lingering or not, right? Remember from the satisfaction language podcast, if you are telling yourself, I want to feel not terrible when I'm done, that's very different than I want to feel energized and nourished and light and airy and fit. Like very different, not terrible versus energized, nourished, light, airy, and fit. And so the clearer you can be with yourself about how you want to feel physically when you're done eating, the easier it will be to know whether or not you're lingering. And here's a couple of examples of what I mean by lingering. So for me, it will go something like I have decided I wanted to eat a couple bowls of popcorn. I am just like going through a popcorn phase these days. And so sometimes I'll have like my green smoothie. And then like today I had some steak. And when I'm hungry at my next hunger level, I will have 2 bowls of popcorn. And lately I've noticed my brain's like, well, how about just like another half a bowl? I mean, you're at the weight you want. Like it doesn't really matter. And a little bit more, like it's not going to hurt anything. That's kind of what it sounds like in my brain. Or there was a phase of my life where it would be when I'm sitting down to eat a meal. And I noticed this in the very beginning, and I still go through phases of noticing this for myself when I'm eating a meal with my kids. When I first started eating with my son, Ben, and then with my daughter, Gemma, and now we have Jack too, but especially when I was eating with Ben and Gemma before we had Jack, I just felt quite overstimulated with eating with 2 little kids. And so I would just notice myself eating and then being like, I just need like one more piece of meat, or I just need like one more small bowl of the Tex-Mex we're eating, or I just need like one more little bite of curry, or I just need like one piece of chocolate. It was just like trying to prolong the eating experience slightly past my optimal satisfaction level. And the woman in the Naturally Thin for Life program, she shared for her, it was just like eating a few more nuts. Just like it's just a couple nuts. Like I still feel good in my body, but it just was a little bit past what she thought was probably her optimal satisfaction level. So lingering is just like you're just kind of hanging out a little bit longer potentially in your eating experience than you know that your body really wants you to. So you just go a little bit past your optimal satisfaction level. And sometimes for some of us, we go way past our optimal satisfaction level. So if that's you, you can totally use what I'm going to teach you in today's episode. But the point is not that it matters whether or not you eat a couple more nuts or another half a bowl of popcorn or one more little bowl of Tex-Mex or whatever it is. That's not the point. What I want you to glean from this podcast episode is why you're doing it so that you can actually show yourself food is not what's creating why you're doing it. And so that then you can have the freedom of not needing the food to create whatever your brain is thinking the food is creating for you in that moment when you are lingering. And I often notice this with women that get really good at understanding their hunger level. They get really good at eating only when they're hungry. They really enjoy their hunger. They love their hunger. They love answering their hunger. And so they've kind of like nailed down that part of being naturally thin. But then they find themselves lingering just a little bit or just even more than a little bit like past their optimal satisfaction level. And it's just like this tinkering with, just a little bit more. And when you're being honest with yourself, especially when you're very clear on how you want to feel physically when you're done eating, using your very nuanced satisfaction language that I taught you, it will be so obvious whether or not you're kind of tinkering and lingering in your food experience. And when you're doing this, when you're lingering, it's not allowing you to feel as alive, as vibrant, and as energized as you want to feel when you're being really honest with yourself about whether or not you're lingering. And sometimes this comes in, like I said, for women that have kind of like nailed down the hunger part, where they have an understanding that they know they enjoy their hunger experience. And they know there's often long periods of time between when their body is hungry. And so they know they might not be hungry again for a while. So they tell themselves something like, well, now's your chance. You're not going to be eating until tomorrow again. Maybe it's going to be 12 more hours until you're eating. They have those thoughts kind of running through their mind. And sometimes they're not always aware of them. So notice if that's you. Notice if you feel very solid in your experience of hunger, but you're like, well, but I'm not going to be hungry again for a while. So just like a few more nuts, another bite of chocolate, a little more popcorn, just a little more of this serving. Like I just want a little bit more when you know you've already reached your optimal satisfaction level. And so it can sound a little bit like that in our brain, like, but I'm not going to be hungry again for a while. Sometimes it can sound like, well, the food just tastes so good. But when you've already reached your optimal satisfaction level and you're telling yourself, but the food just tastes so good, I want you to insert instead of food just tastes so good, like redline that. I want you to cross that out from your brain once you've reached your optimal satisfaction level and instead say to yourself, my temporary escape feels so good. There's something you're escaping. There's an association with the food that you think the food is creating some experience for you that you think just feels so good. It has actually nothing to do with the taste. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. And it's why sometimes we have like what we think of as like chocolate, quote unquote, bliss. And I talked more about this on the live training that I did earlier this week, how to break any eating habit. And if you're interested in watching that live training, you can get the replay at lauradixoncoaching.com/habit-replay. So it's lauradixoncoaching.com/habit-replay. We'll put the link in the show notes. And so you can see in that training, I walk you through a more thorough understanding of why this happens, but we get chemically addicted to different emotional states. And I talk more in that training about the difference between emotions as the chemical signature in our body and feelings as simply our awareness of what's happening chemically in our body and how that creates and automates our habits and how we can then use a process to break those habits. But what happens when we tell ourselves, well, the food just tastes so good, or I'm not going to be hungry for that much longer, or just a little bit more doesn't matter once you've already reached your optimal satisfaction level, is that you create an association in your mind between food and the lingering. You think food is either the escape from something or food is creating more enjoyment or peace or calm or presence. You associate that kind of lingering time with food as something that feels very good, as something that is emotionally creating something that you want. But then what happens is you think the food is creating it, but the food itself is not actually creating that experience. So I want you to look at it from two angles to understand what I mean by this. I want you to ask yourself this question. When you're lingering, when you have that pull, that desire, that urge to kind of linger and eat past your optimal satisfaction level, I want you to ask yourself these two questions. Question number one, first, what am I escaping, avoiding, or putting off? So what feeling am I escaping, avoiding, or putting off by hanging out in this lingering, eating a little bit more phase? Am I escaping, avoiding, or putting off dread? That happens a lot when we procrastinate. Am I putting off anxiety? Am I escaping some lack of motivation? Am I avoiding some boredom? What am I escaping, avoiding, or putting off when I hang out here in my lingering eating? So that's question number one. And then question number two is, what do I think the food is creating? So first, what am I escaping? And then what do I think the food, this lingering, is creating for me? Do I think it's creating bliss or presence or peacefulness or calm or relaxation or excitement or enjoyment? What do I think this food is creating, especially when you're lingering and you've already reached your optimal satisfaction level? And here is how we know the food isn't actually creating the escape, and the food isn't actually creating the calm, the peacefulness, the bliss, or whatever you think it is creating. Because if I said to you, okay, I am now going to give you $1 billion, billion with a B, if you stop eating at your optimal satisfaction level and you're really honest with yourself, and we can measure it, by the way, scientifically, let's say, and if you stop eating at your optimal satisfaction level, I'm going to give you $1 billion with a B. All of the sudden, and you really believe that I was going to give you $1 billion, right? If you just play that mental game for yourself, all of the sudden your mind would stop associating the chocolate past your optimal satisfaction level with bliss. It would stop associating a few more nuts with calm or peacefulness. It would stop associating the popcorn with relaxing instantly. So your mind is infinitely more powerful than you give it credit for. At least most of us, we just need to keep reminding ourselves of that. I often forget it. I'm like, oh, that's right. My mind is way more powerful than I give it credit for. So the food itself is not creating the escape. The food itself is not creating the calm, the peacefulness, the presence, or the bliss, or whatever you think it is creating. But I want you to answer those two questions for yourself. What do I think I'm escaping, avoiding, or putting off? And what do I think the food is creating? And get really specific on what those feelings are. So maybe it's dread, maybe it's boredom, maybe it's anxiousness. And then when you understand what that feeling is, you become the objective, neutral observer. So you neutralize that feeling that you think you are escaping by hanging out in the lingering, by eating a little bit past your optimal satisfaction level. And when you do this, when you become the neutral, objective observer, you see that it isn't actually really that uncomfortable, and that it is actually not anything you need to escape or put off, and that you don't need to avoid it, and you don't need food to escape it. And I talk more about that very specific process on how to do that, how to become the objective, neutral observer in the episode number 86, How to Feel. And I went even more in depth on that process on the live training we just did, How to Break Any Eating Habit. And you can get that live training replay again at lauradixoncoaching.com/habit-replay. Link will be in the show notes. So you can go to either of those resources to apply being the neutral objective observer. Because when you're doing this, essentially what you're doing is you're watching your body experience an emotion by asking yourself very objective questions and then answering the questions from the perspective of your body. And when you ask yourself these questions about the emotion, you turn on a different part of your brain. You turn on your prefrontal cortex, the observing part of your brain that watches your body experience an emotion. And you neutralize it through this process, and it allows you as the human to release yourself from what feels like the power of that emotion. So it stops feeling like that emotion is running the show. It stops feeling like that emotion is driving your behavior, or like the anxiousness is so strong that you need to escape it. All of a sudden, you see that emotion lose its power when you go through this process. So that's for the first question. What am I escaping, avoiding, or putting off? Then, for the second question, what do I think this lingering with the food is creating? Do I think it's creating calm or peacefulness, enjoyment? And then I want you to ask yourself, how can I create even more of whatever I think this lingering is creating without even needing the food? And I'm going to give you a couple of ways to do this. First of all, very tactically, you can plan something to do that you enjoy more than food, that you don't have to think about enjoying more than food. You just love it even more than food for something that you do when you are done eating. And on our coaching call, we actually talked about this for a couple of minutes. And she had said there are times for her where she just kind of sits there and enjoys being in her body and just sits in the silence for a minute or two. And I had shared with her too, and everyone else on the call, that sometimes I will eat what I wanted to eat. I'll be at my optimal satisfaction level. And I'll just look outside at the sunshine or the leaves blowing in the breeze just for a minute or two, just to enjoy the calmness, enjoy the peacefulness. And the irony is, or maybe not so irony, is when I'm feeling physically uncomfortable, I'm not going to want to do that. So if I know that's what I'm going to be doing, I don't actually want to linger. I don't really want to not feel good in my body. And so if I know I'm going to be going for a walk afterwards, or I know I'm going to be on a live coaching call, or I know I'm going to be playing with my kids and going outside with my kids, I don't want to be feeling physically not good. Even just a little bit, even just a tinge. I want to be at my optimal satisfaction level. So that's something you can do tactically. Plan something to do that you enjoy more than food, even if it's just for a minute or two for when you're done eating. That's one piece of it. But here's what's even better than that is when you ask yourself some questions I'm going to give you here, and let yourself answer them in a way that really serves you. So I love to think about feeling good in my body. It's just so much more fun than food. So what if for you, feeling so alive, so vibrant, so energized in your body, feeling so physically good was even more fun than the food itself? What if that was all you needed to be so in love with feeling so good in your body that you lose that desire to linger, because nothing compares to feeling so good in your body? You can also ask yourself, how do I create that bliss, that peacefulness, that calm that I think the lingering is creating? How do I create that for myself? By simply using my own mind. We as humans are designed to be at our optimal weight. Our bodies want to be functioning as optimal as possible all of the time. And so just like our bodies are designed to be naturally thin, our bodies are also designed to live in more of the emotional states of joy and love and gratitude and calm and relaxed and focused and creative, rather than the tense, tight, stressed out feelings that so many of us spend most of our time in. We just get addicted to anxious, addicted to stressed, addicted to overwhelmed and restlessness, only because they're just very chemically familiar in our bodies. But our bodies are designed to grow and repair and rest and digest. And that requires more emotions of joy and love and gratitude and calm and relax and focus and creative, so that we're more open, we're more expansive. And so when you ask yourself these questions, what if feeling so good in my body physically was 10 times more fun than food? Or how do I create the bliss and the calm and the peacefulness so that I don't even need the food? When you ask yourself some of these questions, and I'll give you a few more questions to ask yourself, because your brain and your body's innate desire is to be at its optimal weight, to feel as good physically as possible, your brain and your body, because they want to feel as good as possible, they also want to be in the emotional states that foster that. And the emotional states that foster that are joy and love and gratitude and calm and relaxed and focused and creative and open and expansive, and those type of emotions that aren't you feeling stressed out and anxious and overwhelmed and restless. So because your brain and your body's innate desire is to be at your naturally thin weight and to feel more open, to feel more expansive, to allow that naturally thin weight to be there, your brain and your body will often answer and find ways for you to feel more of these feelings, to create more of these feelings with your own mind and not needing then to linger with some extra nuts or some popcorn or a little bit of chocolate. And so it's often much easier for your brain and your body to kind of automatically create a more calm, relaxed emotional state than you might think when you simply get out of the way. Because your brain and your body want to be at the optimal emotional state and the optimal physical state, and they work hand in hand. And a lot of times I want to talk about this for just a brief minute, and I'm going to do a whole separate podcast episode on being present, because a lot of us that overthink, overanalyze, are perfectionists in our head all of the time, we struggle with being present. And so sometimes we linger with our food to kind of get into the present moment. And if you're looking to be present, but we don't know how, and we tell ourselves that food helps us do that because it tastes so good or it feels so good to eat it, we're missing the opportunity to develop the skill of being in the present moment without the food. And I have been working on this for myself and finding ways to really be more and more in the present moment. And I'm still in the process of finding the easiest ways that I can do that for myself so that I can share more of that with all of you. But when we tell ourselves that food is how we do it, then we always need the food to do it. Then we need to linger sometimes to feel that presence rather than creating that presence just for ourselves with our own mind. Okay. So some of these questions you can ask yourself to create whatever you are thinking the lingering is creating for you, which it's actually not. You just think it is. What if feeling as alive, vibrant, and energized in your body is more fun than food? That's a question I already gave you to consider and ponder. And here are two other questions I've just been asking myself lately that have been so fun. And they are this: what if this was my favorite part? And this is just whatever I'm doing right now. So I actually have it on a large index card on my computer screen. What if this was my favorite part? Because I noticed a slight kind of urgency happening in my mind where I was like, well, when I get done recording this podcast, then I'll eat. Or when I get done, writing these emails, then I'll eat. As if it was kind of like I didn't want to be doing what I was doing. And then I got this reward of doing something I wanted to do, which was eat. And it wasn't creating a different number on the scale, but I was like, I just want to be more present in what I'm doing all of the time. So I started just asking myself this question: what if this was my favorite part? And not actually changing anything in my day. So I ask myself this question, like, what if this was my favorite part? I ask myself that even when I get out of bed. What if this was my favorite part? What if my son Ben is doing some tongue exercises? He had a tongue tie released about 2 months ago, and we're just doing some exercises to retrain his tongue and all the things. And for a while, I told myself I really hate doing these exercises. And so I've just been asking myself, what if this was my favorite part? What if me going for a walk was my favorite part? What if me writing this email was my favorite part? What if me coaching my clients was my favorite part? And now some of these things, it's very easy for me to be like, yes, that already is my favorite part. I love coaching in the Naturally Thin for Life program. I love going for a walk and thinking about all of you and writing some notes for a podcast. I love listening to audiobooks. I love reading. I have started to love meditating. So there's some things that are like very easy for me to be like, yep, this is my favorite part. But then with the challenges where something takes a little bit more mental energy and effort, that I will ask myself, what if this was my favorite part? So for example, my husband is going to go fishing overnight, which means I feed our 2 dogs. We give our 2 dogs raw dog food, and it's not my favorite, but I'm like, what if I just challenge my brain for this to be my favorite part? And it's not my favorite in comparison to other things I'm doing. It's just like, what if this was my favorite part because it's what I'm doing right now in this moment? And why not? Why not make everything I'm doing in that moment my favorite part? It slips me into presence in a way that feels so expansive and so open, and in a way that I have zero desire to linger with food. Because when I'm searching for relaxation, when I'm searching for presence, when I'm searching for enjoyment and bliss, and I ask myself, what if this was my favorite part? It becomes my favorite part, and I don't need food to create that. And then the last question I'll leave you with is, what if this was my last day? How would I take this moment in? And when I ask myself that question, for me, it doesn't feel morbid at all. It doesn't make me fear dying or anything like that. I just like to explore in my own mind. I'm like, what if this was my last day? What if this was my last moment doing this thing I'm doing right now? What if this was the last podcast I was recording? What if this was my last moment putting my kids to bed? It creates presence for me, not fear and worry and anticipation and like dread for the future. So if it creates any of that for you, scratch it. Find some version of it that creates presence for you. But when I ask myself this question, what if this was my last moment? Like, how would I just enjoy my day? I don't, again, change anything in my day. So I'm right. If it truly was my last day and I knew that, I probably would just be hanging out with my family and I wouldn't be really like doing anything, right? So I would probably actually change the structure of my day, right? So that's not the point of this question. The point of this question is to just create more presence. And if you struggle with being present, sometimes these questions can just drop you into immediate presence. And so when I ask myself, what if this was my last day? How would I take it all in? All of the sudden, I'd been doing this for a couple of weeks, but I noticed I was helping my daughter and we had breakfast, and she is 2 going on 3. And so she was taking her oatmeal bowl and she hadn't finished it. There was kind of a lot left. She just wasn't that hungry, and she went to put it on the counter and it just went everywhere. And I'm generally pretty calm with the kids, but a lot of times that means I will feel irritated or I'll feel annoyed, and I just kind of like let it come and I let it go. And I have to just kind of consciously not react to those emotions. I just release those emotions. But I've been asking myself this question, like, what if this was my last day? How would I experience this? I noticed I didn't have any annoyance, no irritation, no frustrated. I just like looked at her cute face and I was just like, oh, I guess we'll just clean it up. And because I'd been asking myself this question, I've just got in the habit of being more present and just enjoying what I'm doing, even when I'm cleaning up oatmeal, or even when we went to the zoo and we had to wait in line a little bit. I'm like, how would I just enjoy this moment? And I just like turned around, I was talking to my kids and just like enjoying waiting in line at the zoo, which is totally not my typical nature. And the funny thing with asking myself this question, like, what if this was my last day? How would I enjoy it? I remember many years of my life saying to myself, you know what? When I get old, when I am retired, so in my head, I used to tell myself, when I'm like 65, which I would tell myself that's old. And now I'm like, that's like only halfway. I would be like, okay, when I get older and I'm retired, then I'm going to eat anything and everything and I'll be fat and I won't care. But here's the crazy thing to me. I have no desire ever to feel uncomfortable. If this was my last experience, I would not want to spend one single moment being in a body that's uncomfortable. Being present creates more enjoyment and more focus and intention on what I'm doing in the present moment, so much so that I'm so present that I don't want to be present with an uncomfortable body. So really understand for yourself. This is what I said at the beginning, and this is why I think it's so important that we can look at lingering. We can look at eating just a few more bites or just a little bit more, just going a little bit past that optimal satisfaction level as just not a big deal. And you can totally decide it's not a big deal and just kind of keep going on. But what if instead you took it as a moment to ask yourself, what am I escaping, avoiding, or putting off? Let me release myself from that, and then let me create whatever I think that lingering is creating. Let me create that without the food. Let me show myself how powerful my own mind is. And I love asking myself some of these open-ended questions, and I can see how my brain is going to work creating that presence for me, even when I'm not like in the very conscious reminding myself, what if this is my favorite part? I literally am going to bed more and more being like, whoa, that was just the best day. Like genuinely, I'm not convincing myself of it. I'm just enjoying my days more. I'm enjoying these moments more. And I never, when I am enjoying my life and loving my life and asking myself, what if this was my favorite part? And what if this was my last moment? How would I take this all in? It just creates a love for life, a more fulfilling experience. And I'm not actually changing anything. I'm just tapping into the own power of my own mind. And I never, ever need food to create that for me. All right, my friends, I hope you all have a beautiful week, and I will talk with you all next time. Friend, if you are loving what you are learning here on the podcast, you have to come check out my Naturally Thin for Life program. It is my on-demand lifetime access program where I teach you brand new concepts not taught here on the podcast. And I will walk you through exactly how to implement all of the tools I teach you here so that they become just a part of you. You will learn exactly how to understand your specific brain and your specific body so that you become naturally thin for the rest of your life and you no longer struggle with your weight. Inside of the Naturally Thin for Life program, you can also receive live help so that you consistently make progress and reach your goal. I will teach you how to accelerate your naturally thin journey in a sustainable way so that the change becomes permanent. The best part is that it's risk-free. You either love it or I will give you your money back. If you are ready to finally be naturally thin for life, join us at lauradixoncoaching.com/work with me. That's LAURADIXON coaching.com and click on the Work With Me tab. I cannot wait to see you there.